I mean, how do we trust this administration when it comes to really anything of importance, including its posture with respect to the Middle East? I mean, you heard on Mike Scott's newscast, Comrade Bernie decrying any sort of blank check we would give Netanyahu as the left continues to cater to its anti-Semitic base. Even as Netanyahu is calling on Palestinians and even Hamas terrorists to surrender. He did again over the weekend. Put down your arms. Do not die at the hands of, or do not die for Sinwar, is literally what he said. And Sinwar is the leader of the political wing in Gaza. Don't die for him, because that's what's going to happen. He's the bad actor. Bibi, I'm talking about, according to the left. And Zelensky is Eastern Europe's George Washington. How do I believe that? How do I believe the administration is acting in the nation's best interests when you have stories after stories like this one? A New York Post examination of George Soros' Open Society Foundation records shows that Soros, who is Jewish, I remember criticizing George Soros as it being anti-Semitic. Right, okay. See if this squares with that assertion. He's given nearly $50 million since 2016 to the International Crisis Group.
What's that?
Which is a think tank that was headed up by Robert Malley before he joined the Biden administration as special envoy to Iran in 2021. This is Robert Malley in 2010 on Hamas and Hezbollah.
Hezbollah and Hamas, the two most prominent groups, although the Sadrists in Iraq also fall in that category. It's a mistake to only think of them in terms of their terrorist violence dimension. They're social political movements, probably the most rooted movements in their respective societies. Hamas, not a majority among Palestinians by any means, but very deeply rooted. It's been, it was born in the first Palestinian Intifada in the 1980s. It has deep loyalty. It has a charity organization, a social branch. It's not something you can defeat militarily either, and people need to understand that. There's so much misinformation about them. I mean, I speak to them, and my colleagues speak to them. Now, we may disagree with them, but they have their own rationality. That's one thing to understand. None of them are crazies. They may do things that we consider to belong to a different realm of rationality, but within their own system, it's often very logical. If Hamas is not allowed to govern, if we squeeze them, and you may have good reasons for doing that, but if you do that, we'll tell you what the reaction will be. Rockets. No doubt. And consolidation of Hamas's power in Gaza. Both things have happened.
Mm-hmm. So Malley is an apologist. They have a social organization. They have poker night, so on and so forth. It's wonderful. He's an apologist for terrorist organizations. He's also an apologist, as this entire administration is, for the world's leading state sponsor of terror. That would be Iran, as Malley is the special envoy that was attempting to resuscitate the glide path to a nuclear Iran deal that was initiated under Joe Obama's first two terms. And you want me to trust the foreign policy posture, the national security posture of this administration, whether it comes to Ukrainian aid, whether it comes to reauthorizing Section 702 of FISA. Boy, I'm having difficulty squaring the circle on that. Maybe Stephen Bucci can help. Stephen Bucci joins us, of course. He has served America for 3 decades as an Army Special Forces officer and top Pentagon official. He is a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies at present. Stephen Bucci, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to be back on the show with you both, and I'm glad to be back.
So what about that? Why should I pay any mind, much less, if I was a member of Congress, particularly Republican. Why should I buy the line that the Biden administration is selling on the Middle East, on Eastern Europe, on Section 702, which was, of course, topical from last week because of Christopher Wray's testimony, on just about anything else?
It's very difficult to do it. Your point with Mr. Malley there is exactly spot on. I mean, if you could have put all of the apologist tropes that anyone uses for horrific organizations, he had them all in that statement talking about Hamas and by implication Hezbollah. They're horrific organizations. They're tied to the Muslim Brotherhood. They're tied to Iran. Come on. There's no way that they're legitimate. And, if you squeeze them, it'll just create rockets. Well, if you don't squeeze them, they seem to create rockets too. The rockets are sort of a given, but they think that's okay because, after all, it's a social movement. Well, so was the National Socialist movement in Germany, which was also elected. And it had a huge social component to it. And it turned out to be the most horrific government regime we've ever seen, unless maybe you count, Joe Stalin's. It's crazy to sit there and argue this. And Biden can't have it both ways. He wants to be seen as a supporter of Israel, but at the same time, he's got all these people in his administration that are saying, well, maybe we better do a ceasefire, or at least a pause. And Israel, you need to be more precise than who? They're the most precise military in the history of warfare, frankly, other than maybe some who didn't fight at all. It's crazy.
So here's the problem then for me, and maybe this is too simplistic, but he's telling, Biden administration telling Netanyahu to pump the brakes, which I disagree with, and he's telling us to press the pedal down in terms of anything that Zelensky wants, which I'm skeptical of, I guess I would say, because I can't trust this guy's judgment and the judgment of the people around him.
And Zelensky's coming to the White House tomorrow.
Well, he's got to go to more than the White House, because the White House doesn't get to give him money by itself. The Congress has to agree, and significant members of Congress, not just Republicans, but others, are scratching their head and going, you know what? How do we, as you say, square this circle? It's very, very difficult when you put the border, our own border, which is so porous, the open arms to Ukraine, but now the country that's our best ally in the Middle East, we're telling them, hey, just suck it up. It was only a couple of hundred people kind of stuff. I'm sorry, no, they shouldn't pump the brakes. We should be aiding them and assisting them in stepping forward. And frankly, we should be stepping forward, particularly where those Iranian proxy groups are hitting our folks. The impotent response to that, the decision not to go after the Houthis, who is coming up with that? Why does anyone think that's a good idea? We should be hammering those folks, particularly the installations that have Iranian IRGC Quds Force advisors living there, so that we can hit them. Because I don't think we ought to start hitting targets inside Iran yet. I think that would be too far. It wouldn't necessarily be beneficial, but I think we can message them very strongly by really putting the wood to all of their proxy groups that are already shooting at us. So it's not that we've provoked it. They shot at us first. We have every right to shoot back, even if you do proportionality, shoot back at least the same number of times they shoot at us.
Right. Well, the Iran proxies, they attacked the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, and Biden has done nothing.
Yeah, it's absurd to do that. No one has justified their decision not to fire at the Houthis, who are shooting, at ships in the Persian Gulf. They're shooting potentially at our ships there. They're firing towards our ally. We ought to be taking responsible steps. It's no good to be bellicose when it's not in our interest and wimpy when it is in our interest. I don't understand that. They seem to have it completely backwards.
Yeah, and last week we saw Putin and MBS from Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, yucking it up. And maybe they were just, celebrating the Live Tour, getting John Rahm or something. But they seem to be in very good spirits, Putin and MBS. The Iranians seem to be in pretty good spirits, too, because we're making them we're making them rich because of our inability or our lack of desire, I should say more accurately, to sanction the Iranians. We're doing the same thing for Putin by hamstringing our own energy production. We've got these goofballs from the Biden administration at the COP28 conference decrying fossil fuels, while we're putting tens, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, really, into the pockets of Iranian mullahs and that Russian dictator because of our energy posture and policy. So, where does that go? That and this idea that the Saudis are some sort of ally of convenience in the Middle East, as again MBS is entertaining Putin.
Yeah, we've got to come up with a coherent foreign policy posture. We don't have that. We haven't had it since Biden came into office, and it swings back and forth. It calls people our friends, our enemies. It calls people who are clearly our enemies, they're potential partners. Come on, open your eyes. Ray Charles could see and evaluate these people more accurately than the Biden administration in all of its parts. And we've got to do it better because our adversaries are looking at this, and some unpredictability can be a benefit in foreign policy. But when your friends and your adversaries are totally clueless as to what in the world you might be trying to do, that's just dangerous. It'll scare away our friends. It'll embolden our adversaries. And it's kind of what we have right now.
Chris Wray's testimony last week before the Senate committee, I want to zero in particularly on Section 702, which I mentioned. This is the one of the spying provisions under the FISA Act. It's up for reauthorization. The Biden administration is pushing it. And senators like Mike Lee are pushing back because of the abuses that have been documented and reported, and because of the less than persuasive, I would argue, responses from Christopher Wray about the reforms that have been made that I can't tell you what they are. If I was, based on what I know, which is not as much as these senators do, but I would be with Mike Lee. I would, and I know there's competing proposals for reauthorization of 702, but I certainly wouldn't be supportive of giving the FBI the power that it's enjoyed up until this point under FISA. Is that fair, or am I wrong?
No, I think you're being entirely fair. Look, I was in the government on 9/11 and stayed in the government until the end of the Bush administration. So I was there when all that stuff went into place. And to be frank, we thought the FISA provisions were the stopgap that would keep this from going off the rails, that those judges would be able to oversee, any sort of overreach with those provisions. We then found out during the Obama administration that, when Snowden released it all, that, gosh, the American people looked at it and said, no, you haven't put enough safety there. We don't think this is appropriate. We are not comfortable with it. They voted vocally against this sort of thing through the Congress, which was one of the few times the Congress actually stood up and acted like they're supposed to. And it's still there. And the FBI, with its behavior all through Obama and then into Trump and now under President Biden, it is they have lost the faith and the trust of the American people. Maybe individual FBI agents are still good, and I think that's probably true, but the leadership is completely without any sort of credibility in the minds of the American people as far as protecting our rights and our constitutional values. So no, Mike Lee is exactly right. They should be very skeptical. They should really say, look, I'm sorry, if you can't talk to us about it, then it didn't happen. So no, you didn't put the reforms in place. Request denied. Show us the reforms. If they're sufficient, then we'll relook this. But to just say, I'm sorry, you just don't understand, you little people. We got this under control. No, the FBI doesn't have that kind of credibility anymore.
Stephen Bucci served America for 3 decades as an Army Special Forces officer and top Pentagon official, as he was just describing. He's a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies. Steve Bucci, thanks as always.
It's my pleasure. We'll talk to you next week.
All right, thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
The truth is, viruses cannot be killed, and unlike bacteria, viruses are not alive. A virus is what we call a biologic entity, but we can still do something. We can destroy